I
feel
like
like
that.
this is a good moment to record. Sorry, go ahead. Julia, go ahead.
No, I was just saying I like that, Darlene. I appreciate that.
I didn't know if it's right, and I don't know if this goes along the way, Darlene, but when I try to tell stories to kids in chapel, I try to model some perspective taking. So like the clearest one for me is about Abraham tying up his son, right? And I tried, instead of saying like, oh, like you must do this, I try to say like, hey, Abraham wanted to give God a gift, and he thought, what's the most valuable thing I have, right? And he settled on his kid, and he wanted to give God a gift that he couldn't take back. So he thought he would do it like this. And what do you all think about that? And the kids are like, not a good idea. Don't do that. And I'm like, yep, I think you're right. But can you see how Abraham thought that? So this story is here to teach us what kind of gifts God most appreciates, which is like not the life of your child. I know that's a little bit like tricky, right? But I actually have to hear that story that way. And if I do, like if I personally hear the story that way, it makes me wonder like, boy, well, what do I think I'm giving God that God's not interested in? Like, what would God rather have from me than like some kind of sacrifice of somebody's life? Like maybe God's not asking me to be miserable, which is like I grew up thinking that I made God happy by being miserable. You know, like maybe God actually would like me to enjoy my life. Anyway. It's hard to do that for every story, because if I'm honest, sometimes I hear a story and I'm like, there is nothing positive about that story at all. Like I cannot give anybody generous intentions in that story whatsoever. But usually that means there's something wrong with me. You know, so like practicing generous intention giving in Bible stories is an interesting spiritual discipline. Lila, you unmuted, so you got something you're going to say maybe.
Oh, just what Darlene said, and Elizabeth, yeah, and Julia. And, you know, everything they said for children, it works for me right now. Just saying. And thank you. I think as a kid, I never believed that story. It was too weird.
Oh, the Abraham story?
No, the Mary story.
Oh, the Mary story. Well, you know, it's like I hear people, and somebody last week shared too, like, hey, I don't know that it happened just like quite like this. Like maybe this lady was taken advantage of or whatever. You know, like you can think whatever you want, but the story we get is not that. The story is about a lady who gives consent, right? So I think in the end, like it's sort of like we can think about, you know, other versions of the story, but what do we do with the one we got? How old was Mary? We don't know. Like, what does it mean to give consent? Like, to be honest, I think it's really fair to say like, hey, I got confirmed when I was really younger. I was like 32. I didn't know what I was doing, you know, and Mary didn't completely understand what she was doing either. Who knows what it means to be a mother? I'm not even one, like, I don't know, but to be a dad, I'm still trying to figure that one out. Like it's an identity change, right? It's not like you just do this thing. And a lot of the years I felt like I was just a babysitter. I was like, this is not my child. Like I'm like a caretaker for this thing. Like I don't know, like there's just weird feelings with like parenthood. Lots of expectations and like, you know, foreboding joy and perfectionism. And like, it's just like, it's tough. Who's ready for that? You know, like if you had to wait till you're ready, I don't think anybody would have kids, right? Like, because you know better than to do it. Yeah.
Mike, I don't think we ever get it figured out. Even at my stage of life, there are questions. What should I do? Did I do something wrong? You know, it's parenthood is a lifelong thing that is a gift if we can look at it as a gift.
Yeah.
No, this is an opportunity to love and have compassion and guide, and we're gonna get it wrong at times, even now.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's like I didn't hear that interpretation of the nativity story at church when I was a kid, but it's a really good interpretation for me now. You know, what I heard is like, you know, biblical parents, they know everything what they should be doing. And man, after a lot of Bible study, I'm vexed.
Well, and even the teaching about deacons. If your kids are unruly, you
Oh,
can't
yeah.
be a deacon.
Ooh.
Well, our kids are going to be unruly. Where are we going to get the deacons, quote unquote?
Right. Yeah, from people who don't have any.
Yeah.
Thanks for entertaining this question. This is probably not what you wanted to talk about. So let me make room for what you wanted to talk about, which is at least chapters 5 through 9, but maybe you want to go backwards some too.
I want to say something really quick because you said something just now that made me think of something that you wrote in chapter 7. And anyway, I really liked it. And I like sent it to a couple friends because I was like, yes, this is a good reminder. But you said full places get dirty real fast and lose the ability to screen applicants, which I appreciate the second part of the sentence. But the first part of the sentence, I was like, this is a really good reminder for me, because as I'm like stepping on a Lego and finding Jack's underwear in the kitchen, like my house is a mess because it's full of all the things that I love, you know? So that was really good. And I have a friend that, you know, will go back and forth and she's like, oh my gosh, it's like, you know, I just cleaned the house yesterday and now it's exploded again and blah, blah, blah. So I sent that to her and she was like, yes, this is a good reminder. Like, yeah, I'm going to be annoyed, but you know, I don't want the alternative.
Yeah, thank you. Elizabeth, please.
Oh yeah, so back on chapter 3, there was I just got my book this week, so I'm really enjoying it. But one of the things that I highlighted was at the end on page 8, where it says, maybe our participation with God in grace distribution isn't really about whether or not we are given grace, but whether or not we choose to open the gift and enjoy it. And I love that, really spoke to me because, you know, talking about like growing up, I felt, and I still can fall into that trap, even involving parenting, like I need to do this a certain way and be really good at it. And then God's going to bless me, right? Or God's going to give me grace. Where I've heard this before, where like the grace is always there, but it's up to me to accept it, right? And that when you wrote that, I was like, man, that's so true, because it puts God in not that box, you know, like, well, if Elizabeth is a perfect mom and Elizabeth does this right, then God's like, oh, I love you, you know. No, his grace is always there. And so I really like that. Thanks.
Thank you. Antha, please.
So that's one thing. So that was in this end of chapter 7 where Julia, I think, found her thing too, is talking about us as God's family. And one of the things, and so it seems to me, you were talking earlier about what he wants, and it seems to me it's a relationship. My grandmother, you know, when she'd give us a birthday present or whatever, she didn't want a thank you note. She wanted a phone call. And the reason was, and I didn't catch on to this until after she'd passed, unfortunately, said what she really wanted was a relationship with her grandchildren. And, you know, it's seeing God as a parent or a grandparent figure, you know, you've got to think that's what God wants, is a relationship with his family.
Thank you. I do want to say on top of that, I was just listening to this new book by David Graeber that's called The Beginning of Everything. And it's a new book by anthropologists about like different narratives about the human sort of origin and experience. Yuval Harari wrote one called Sapiens, and they actually take him to task a little bit. It's a long book. I didn't know that I necessarily recommend it, but what David Graeber says about families is like, sometimes we think ancient people loved their families, and people have always found living with their families very difficult. And sometimes ancient people moved so that they didn't have to do that. And I actually find that very hopeful, to think like, hey, instead of us having gotten worse, like it is tough. And I find a lot of beauty and comfort in the idea about living into God's family, if I'm also honest that living into my own family is not always super like fun or easy. So it's there, it's a thing, right? It's an invitation, but it's got its challenges, you know, and there's people I got no challenges with that I'm related to, and there's people I'm like real related to, and I got lots of challenges, you know, and to think like, oh, like church is like that. And hey, we're a family school here at St. Thomas, and all families are dysfunctional, so we got ours, you know, like it's actually like somewhat helpful to say like normatively that's the experience, and in the middle of that experience, like we're still family. Some of my family members I love by not seeing them. I just have to be honest. Like being around them is the way, like not being with them is the way I practice loving them. Because if I were with them, it would be sad for us both. So instead, I choose to love them from afar until I'm able to love them up close. That was maybe controversial. I see that you're all laughing, and I hope you're laughing with me on that one.
I totally agree with you on that. And I'm glad you said that, because I'll hear other people talk about, like typically in some cultures, the family lives together and the family meets up every weekend and hangs out together and they're together all the time. And that's not my story, because sometimes I do have to love people from afar and not get trapped and know that that's okay. Because if God wants me to love people, if I'm around these people all the time, I'm not going to be very loving to them. I'm not going to be who God wants me to be. So sometimes I do have to distance myself for my own health,
Yeah, it's called the adult timeout, right? And like it occurred to me like, hey, we can punish our kids with a timeout, or a timeout's really so that they can like reset and get the brain back, right? And as a grown-up, there's times where I really need a timeout.
Absolutely.
Not to punish me, but so because I've lost my mind, right? And my kids, I would like to give them my mind instead of the one I lost, and so like I've actively, when my son now is getting ready to be 21, and there were a couple of times I was like, you need to not be around me, so do not follow me. Because it will be bad for you if you are around me right now. And the kid would still follow me, and it was like, kid, like I'm telling you now, things will go better for you if you will not follow me. Like I just need a break. And that was, that was family life. Adele, please.
Going a little different direction on chapter 6, the holy recognition, the part that really I marked up and I'm trying to put in practice is talking about at the end of the day and using gratitude practice and looking for sacred moments and, just kind of, again, reflecting, maybe something might have been a disappointment or whatever. What was it in there that was, meant for me? What was, and what can I take from that? And not getting it done every day, but trying to use that and put that into practice and center myself again in that way.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, and that's the Ignatian prayer called the examen, or some people pronounce it examen, that happens at the end of the day. If Marcus Borg, well, he's now deceased, but he was a New Testament scholar, and one of the practices he did was he had a bowl of marbles next to an empty bowl, just like regular marbles. Oh, look, they're disappearing. And his job, he put them prominently like at his desk, wherever he spent most of his time. And he took as his discipline to name a moment of gratitude, moving the marble from the full bowl to the empty bowl. And it was sort of his goal that he would move all the marbles in a day. And the next day he would go back. So it wasn't like, oh, I thank God for the birds and thank God for the trees and the water and like that. I mean, I guess you could do that, but he tried to think of things. Now, I'm not sure he emptied his jar every day, but like tied to that practice of the examine is that at the end of the day, you come back and you think about what were the marbles. And there's people who do this in a, I used to teach speed reading and comprehension. And when we take note-taking was a skill that we taught as well. And every couple of pages or every couple of minutes, we encourage our people to do something called a tellback, which is to put all the details that they just read in their own words as much as they could remember, because it kind of codifies that story in their brain. And at the end of doing that, they wrote something called a main event. So like, what was the main event from that tellback? And at the end of a book, what they had was a list of main events. And having written the list of main events, those were mentally tied and audibly tied to that tellback. So it sort of like quadruples people's retention of a book. And you can do that with the examine as well, right? Because in my bowl, I've got these little ones and I got these big ones, right? And so like at the end of the day, you can say, what were my big marbles for the day? That's a way of creating a gratitude journal so that you can go back and say, like, what were my main events? Sometimes my gratitude for the day is that it won't be repeated tomorrow. You know, like tomorrow will likely be different. But it's a neat experience. I go on and off. I'm really great at doing disciplines sometimes, and other times I'm like, yeah, it's really supporting my life, but I'm tired of it. I don't know about you all. So like I've done this in Lent a couple of times, and then I was like, man, what an improved quality of life I've got. Well, maybe next Lent I'll do that again. You know, like this is stuff we do sometimes. But the examine is a really cool way of integrating with like gratitude practice. Can be. Elizabeth.
Yeah, I like that part too. That and someone has said, I've heard said before that gratitude is an action word. Like it's not just something that I'm going to have all the time. I actually have to take the actions to find gratitude. And I think, not to get too deep with it, but I think that can actually rewire our brain to find gratitude in life in other ways, you know.
Yeah, I didn't put in that chapter. I think I put it when I wrote the one on John, is the brain research I've read says that we're evolutionarily wired to look for threats and negatives and not for positives and consolations. And so if we want to rewire our brain, right, we have to intentionally call out these things that are consoling and are positive. And if we do it enough, actually, the more we do it, the easier it becomes. But you're fighting your own evolution to do it, which is an interesting thing to think about, you know. Not in a military struggle, you're trying to like engineer a way to like pave that super highway so that the neurons can fire that way, you know, like quickly. Not a war, it's an engineering problem. Lila, please. Oh, you got to go. Thank you.
Along the what you were just saying is, you know, with an example of two people I can think of where, you know, my son is much more highly sensitive to threats around him and, you know, and being extra cautious about, and he seems to have a harder time identifying gratitude. And then me, I guess I'm just not as sensitive to threats. I'm kind of, oh, everything's good, everything's fine, you know, I can trust everybody and all. And it does seem to come easier for me. And so it's really helpful to hear that it's, again, how our brains are wired and our genetics and how we were, you know, how we evolved over time. And, you know, in working with that and dealing with as anything that we want to improve that behavior or incorporate these behaviors or minimize behaviors, just understanding, again, how we came to be as a human species with that. And it seems to help in trying to overcome or you know, offset some of these things that we're kind of programmed to do. It's really helpful to know where we've come from.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I think that's super interesting because I feel like there's so many things that are important for like well-being. Like there's all this research on well-being, and all the things that are important for well-being seem very opposite to what our everyday life is now, you know. And that like this, even like with our neurobiology and like wiring for being on alert and, you know, looking for danger. And I don't know, it's really interesting. And I started listening to a book called Shatter, and then I just stopped because I got busy, but it was just talking about how like this inner dialogue that we have with ourselves and how we've evolved to have this like, continual inner dialogue, but how that can become kind of overwhelming. And that I find it interesting that, you know, oftentimes it's like, let's try to calm the inner chatter that we have, or like, you know, not hear it, which almost seems like counterintuitive or like not helpful, rather more just like accepting, kind of like what you're saying, Adele, about just like accepting, well, this is where I've come from and this is where I am.
Julia, I really appreciate you saying that. And we had a speaker at Clergy Conference who read this book called You're Not Listening. And a couple of things that she said that are really interesting to me is that not only do we have this like multiple voices in our head, but some of them are louder than others, and we privilege voices in our head, certain ones. And like for me, I'm just going to go ahead and name this. Like if I earned a 99 on a test, I would be very caught up in the -1. And I've privileged that voice in my head. If I gave like a satisfaction survey and 100 people wrote like, love the community, really appreciate your preaching, and somebody wrote like, oh, the priest says he holds grudges and doesn't like constructive criticism, so we don't give him any opportunities to listen, I would probably experience what Ignatius Loyola calls desolation. Instead of consolation, I would go to desolation over 1 out of 101. And so it's like very real that like I hear those other voices that are like, hey, good job. But what I say to those voices in my head is like, yeah, but really, or you're just optimistic, or you're easily pleased. Like I want to hear that really loud voice that hates me. Like I love hearing that I'm hated. Like this is really bizarre. But we've evolved to do that. I mean, you know, like there's this like interesting research, right, that says that a criticism, our brain experience criticism like it experiences a physical threat, like it releases adrenaline and cortisol, just like a lion in the room would. And I hear that and I'm like, that can't possibly be true. Like that's crazy. But that's what all the research says, is that like we hear criticism as a threat to our lives instead of as somebody else's experience that may or may not have anything to do with us.
I was reading, I don't know, I think I was reading Brene Brown's new book, and she talks about how we feel physical and emotional pain the same way. So yeah, totally agree. And being a physician and having the opportunity for people to evaluate you for every visit that you see, and then seeing those evaluations, yeah, the ones that stick out are the ones that are like, wow, that was really mean, you know, like, and it's just this anonymous survey, and it's just, even if, you know, the vast majority are positive, but it's, I don't know, I feel you there.
I mean, I want to say, even as a parent, right, if my kid's in a bad mood, I rarely think like, oh, she's in a bad mood. I usually think like, oh, my heart, you know, like that hurts so bad. And I didn't say like, oh, she must have had a hard day, or she's tired. I'm like, I'm a terrible human being. These are the kinds of things I like drift into.
I wonder if humans do that more now, because at least us in our society, where we don't have these physical threats to our existence every day, you know, with the lion in the room and all, we have put ourselves in a fortunate situation. We can go throughout our days and not have those kinds of threats. And so we've replaced it, or our mind has replaced it with these other threats to our well-being rather than threats to our physical self. And that's, you know, if we had more day-to-day life-threatening events, we wouldn't worry so much about somebody's little emotions, you know, affecting us. And so our brain's got to find something else, I guess.
I think that's right, actually, what you've said. And it's really interesting. There was this book my wife recommended me read like 4 years ago. I wish I'd read it in high school. It's called Come As You Are, and it's about women's like development. And the book talks about something called the stress cycle, like that our body physically goes through this cycle. And like once the stress response is aroused, like maybe literally you need to run from the lion. Or you need to do yoga, or you need to do something, because like our evolution has us poised to not just hold that stress. Like we're not good at just holding stress. Like there has to be some kind of release that's either like physical or breath induced, or like maybe some people like watch a comedy movie and they laugh it out, but all of that is like physically seated way of like getting rid of the stress response. And to hear that that's like natural, and like, hey, there's nothing wrong with you that you're wound up. Like that's just like, that's who humans are. That's what we do. It's not because we're fallen or evil or bad. Like that's just who we are, is just really helpful to hear.
Being the empath that I am, and being hypersensitive to how my behavior affects others, and just being really vigilant about other people's feelings. I've gotten to a point where I'm aware enough of my own emotions and my own reactions that I try to warn people that if, for instance, I'm really tired today, I was up really late last night, I'm feeling edgy and kind of shaky and a little irritable about nothing in particular. And so I stopped by Richard's desk, my husband's desk this morning, and I said, I'm aware that I'm not quite myself today, or maybe I'm my true self, but I'm feeling this way. I'm feeling irritable, and I want you to know that it has nothing to do with you. If I'm a little snappy, please just know that it's because I'm tired. And he looked so relieved. And I used to do the same thing with my kids when I taught high school. I would go into the classroom and I would let them know, I say, this is not a good day for me. So this is not a good day to challenge me. I might not be as understanding of you today as I was yesterday. So beware. And it really helps me to warn people I'm not at my best. And that lets off some tension for me too, because then I can be better. I've told them I'm not feeling good, and so I can act better once I've said I'm not doing too well today.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that would be an interesting discipline, to inform your spouse or children today may not be your day.
Yeah.
And it's more about me than about you. But keep that in mind. My best may not be quite what you need today.
Yeah.
Anything else stand out from the reading this week?
I feel like I have a lot to say today. So, but yes, I wish I had read this quote by Anne Lamott, like, I don't know, 6 months ago or something, but it's so great that God is not here to take away our suffering or our pain, but to fill it with his or her presence. I just really like that. I have a lot of issues with that idea of prescribed suffering, and I don't know. I like that quote a lot. I thought that was really good.
And Julie, just to follow up, you did read Proverbs of Ashes, right? Which is a tough book, And in the
Mhm.
last chapter, this woman concludes that her deepest experience of God was actually a moment in which she was taken advantage of by another person.
Mhm.
Not because God was the actor, but that God was present with her in that moment.
Mhm.
And I wonder how that sat with you. I know I'm bringing another book into the conversation, but
That was really hard. That was really hard for me. The one where where she was molested and like, yeah, that was really hard. I don't know if I fully worked through that part of the book because it was really difficult to just read that. It was very, very tough. Um, but I think just the idea of God being present with you all of the time. And I feel like y'all were talking about this on Wednesday, like light comes out of darkness, and I don't know where I'm going, but yeah.
I think like Anne Lamott also says she has a couple of interesting turns of phrase, right? She says forgiveness is giving up all hope of having had a different past. And we'll run into that again, right? I think that actually I quote her again in the Luke book. Because that sounds a lot like acceptance. Giving up all hope of having had a different past, even over the things you neither earned nor deserved. For better or for worse, right? And so like, it's interesting to think like, hey, this terrible thing happened to me. And if I'm looking in the mirror and you ask me what I would change, the answer is nothing. Like that seems like a lot of tension between those things, right? Because if I change something, I wouldn't be the person I'm beholding anymore. And to be able to be grateful for that person instead of like critical or sorry, that seems to be like a spirituality that's above what I've got, but I wish I had. I feel like that's where Rebecca Parker comes down in the book Proverbs of Ashes. I mean, like you talk about like where's God when bad things happen, and like on the one side, God's with the victim saying, "Hey, like I'm not going to desert you. Like I'm here with you," and God's with the victim saying, like, "No, no, no, stop, stop, stop." And like it can be both things at the same time, and it's not fully satisfying because God doesn't seem to like stop perpetrators, even though God says stop. They don't always listen. So that's tough. Sometimes I wish God, instead of filling suffering, I would just rather God took it away. I mean, I think it's like helpful to be honest on that point. Like, hey, this whole incarnation, I guess, is really cool, but it'd have been really like more of up to me if like all the kingdoms of the world bowed down to you and you turned all the rocks into bread. Like that would have been really nice. But you found that tempting in a negative way. I think that's the mystery part. When I was young, because I have a math degree, like I wasn't really interested in mystery, and I have the wrong degree anyway. I should have had like an arithmetic degree. I'm really good at adding and subtracting. I'm a pretty good multiplier and divider as well, and I actually can solve a multivariable equation pretty well. Like I can differentiate it and integrate it and all that. But that's not even math. That's just like arithmetic. Like it's problem solving. Like in the math world, people make new problems all the time. Like they make up theoretical problems because I guess the world is good enough that we need to make up more problems. Like that's what real math people do. And I hate that. Like I love solving problems, but as they get older, it's sort of like, okay, well, maybe I don't need to solve that problem you're having, or maybe like God isn't all that interested in solving my problems. I wish, like I love trying to solve problems. My wife hates when I try to solve her problems. She'll say like, oh, I had this tough phone call. I'm like, well, let me tell you what to say next time. And she's like, how about you be quiet? Oh. What's funny is like, if you grew up praying like I pray, I'm like, God, tell me what to do, as if I would listen anyway. You know, like if God was like, you must do this, I would probably like, you stay out of my business.
But I feel like that's like you say it a little bit higher up in that paragraph about pray that part of your journey through Luke will be to welcome God into the rough places. And I think that's so, that's definitely a prayer. Like, please let me welcome you into these rough places. Cause I think it's really easy to not even want to like go there yourself, right? Let alone, ask God to come and sit there with you in it,
Yeah.
Another thing that I've found myself doing in rough places is asking, what am I supposed to do with this? What am I supposed to learn? I don't know what to do. Show me what to do. And sometimes the answer is don't do anything. Just feel my presence. Just be really, really sad. And I think that sadness, if I can think about that sadness as being a gift also, because it's fully experiencing life.
Yeah. So that wonderful part of that movie, Inside Out, which is about these core emotions, right, is that joy is always next to sadness, and like trying to fix that gets rid of the joy. And that joy is something that's able to like live with some sorrow and go forward and still have like awe and wonder. And I think like I'm the only guy on the screen, so I'm just going to say, like, I think socially, like we do both of our primary genders a disservice, because men are not like supposed to be sad. We're supposed to get angry, because anger can be productive and like it releases adrenaline and cortisol, and you can do a lot of stuff when you're angry. And like from the male perspective, like sadness doesn't, like, you can't do anything when you're sad. You like, you don't get adrenaline when you're sad. You don't get cortisol when you're sad. Like you just are sad. And so like we as men, we don't get to hold sadness because it's not productive. And then women aren't allowed to get angry because it's unbecoming a woman to be angry, right? So what we do is we like split these things into these like really unhealthy ways of like women just get to be sad and men just get to be angry. And we're both missing out on like, hey, like to miss out on a fundamental feeling. Because if you ask people what their feelings are, in general, people can say, I'm happy or I'm sad or I'm mad, right? So if men can't be sad, they're losing a third of human emotions. And if women can't be mad, or they shouldn't be mad, they lose a third of human emotions. You know, like it's pretty tough. This is why I love that book, again, Come As You Are, because it talks about having the feels, right? Like having the feels is about being alive. So you can have the feels without them owning you. You just get to have them, right? And then they may leave. Eventually, you hope they'll leave, right? When you get to read Matthew and Luke, you get to read, I mean, Luke is really about Mary's feels. It's about, Joseph doesn't show up in Luke really at all. If you read Matthew, Mary's a bit part. It's all about Joseph. It's interesting to like hold those together. And to think about the other players in the story, right? There's no Elizabeth in Matthew or Mark or John. So you got this like old lady who can't have a baby, and you got this young lady who shouldn't be having a baby, right? And they're pregnant, and like the babies greet each other in utero, which is like this really lovely story about women having solidarity with one another. Like, I think, right? This is like a lady old enough to be Mary's grandmother is her cousin. And like miraculously, these two women who shouldn't be pregnant are pregnant at the same time, and they potentially hold this empathy for each other. It's a good story.
Yeah, I noticed in the chapter where Jesus goes, I guess, stays in Jerusalem and his parents leave, that when they come back and find him, the person that talks to him is Mary. And what she says is almost treats him as a equal. Why'd you do this to us and not show up instead of, I was worried sick about you, kid.
It is the line, though, I got from my childhood that I've often wanted to inflict on my own kids. How could you do this to us? As if our children were like, how do I make mom and dad really mad? I know. More than likely, they were like, ooh, squirrel, I'll follow that. You know, like. I hope that story was interesting, though, about Jesus in the Father's house. You know, like when I think about the flannel board Jesus, all in the white with the blue sash, always like, I was in my Father's house. You know, it's like, oh my gosh, what a brat. You know, like I would not want Jesus to be my child. You know, I mean, having a regular kid is guilt-inducing enough, you know, but a kid that just like always knows the truth, right? But to hear it this other way, that like, hey, like maybe Jesus was just like this little kid, right? And he took religious language like really seriously, so that God literally was his father. And like I hope this doesn't come across as too blasphemous, right? But like when you track the genealogy, Nathan was begat by David, who was begat by Adam, who was begat by God. So Jesus isn't the only child of God. There's like 5 other ones on the screen. Well, I mean, other than me, right? I mean, you know, like it's just like interesting to think about, like maybe Luke is telling a unique story about one person who lived a long time ago that we never really have anything in common with. Or maybe Luke is saying, this is our story. You were begat by God. You. Like Jesus. Like Adam. I don't even want to believe that's true, because it's like too good of a story to be true. Like it's such a good story. I don't know what to do with all of my like anxiety and disappointment. Like I don't know how to merge those stories together, but that might be like the holiest part of the book, is to try to merge that truth with all that other stuff that we say, but no, God, if you only knew, but no, God, like I got this problem, but no, God, but like all of our no's. And that comes back to like saying yes to God is like, okay, yes, I'll say yes. Like I get to be your child. Well, I'm grateful for your time and attention always. I do want to make room for us to get to church, including me. So next week we'll read chapters 10 through 14. So we'll just do 5, if that seems good. And I'll post that in the e-news as well. Really, really grateful for your thoughtfulness, and see you soon.